Hello everyone, welcome to the Low Carbon Web Design Guide. So this is going to be around a 45-minute to 1 hour webinar running through how you can start looking into the impact of your website via its digital emissions and how you can go about reducing those digital emissions. So let's dive right in. To introduce myself, I'm Matt Wheeler. I'm the co-founder and digital director of madeby.studio, the climate conscious digital agency. So we focus on designing and developing low carbon websites, applications, as well as carrying out marketing strategies and brand strategies. I'm also the co-founder of GreenTech Gathering, which is a community of individuals and businesses primarily around West Yorkshire that are all looking to collaborate to make their business more sustainable. And that's through speaking opportunities, knowledge share, and just building a network with businesses with similar values. So to introduce about kind of the digital emissions of websites, it might seem that websites that have no physical impact since everything is stored in the cloud. Although there is a common misconception that because things are within a cloud, there is no kind of physical entity to it. Although with websites, there is data centers which have to store the files. And these are huge spaces which are built from raw materials and are always ever expanding with the amount of data that we are creating as people. However, every website visit, video stream and online action generates carbon emissions. So for example, when you visit a page on a website, that requires energy to communicate with the data center to get the relevant file. And once it's found the relevant file, there is more energy used for like down the wire activity. So sending a file from a data center down a wire to your computer or mobile phone. And then there is also energy consumed for displaying that file on your phone. For example, a web page. A web page is just built out of a series of kind of like languages. And when it is rendered, it requires energy. And the larger that file is, the more energy it uses. So the whole kind of concept of low carbon design and development is you want to reduce the amount of wastage and reduce it as far as you can, because the smaller the file, the quicker it loads, and also the less energy it uses, in turn reducing the amount of environmental emissions. So just to sum it up, for websites to work, they rely on servers, networks, and devices that can collectively use a lot of energy. So at every touch point in a request to a website or an application or anything digital, there is energy used, but we just don't see it because it is kind of in this cloud. Just to provide some context in terms of the amount of emissions the website generates, the internet causes 3.7% of global carbon emissions. So to put it in perspective, I've got a few other stats here which kind of show it in a comparison. So air travel actually causes 2.5% of global carbon emissions. So if you think that we're always told we should just fly less, or fly once less, drive less, no one ever tells us we should browse the internet less, even though the internet is actually creating more carbon emissions than air travel itself. And these stats are actually from 2020, so there isn't any more updated stats, but the kind of common theme from different kind of studies and data sets is that with the introduction of large language models, artificial intelligence, the amount of carbon emissions being generated from the internet is ever increasing exponentially. And this is just due to the amount of data that we're creating. We're not considering the amount of physical space that this data uses because we can't see it. So it is going to become more and more of a problem as we kind of advance in our technologies. So as a collective, as businesses, individuals, there is a reason why we should start considering reducing the environmental impact of our websites. And if we all work together to do that, it would have a huge positive impact on the planet. There's also kind of points where it actually can help your website perform better, which can help you generate more leads, more traffic, and actually generate more profit. So in terms of kind of low carbon websites, sustainable websites, it goes hand in hand with website performance. So it's essentially a no-brainer to kind of do this stuff, because if you're not focused on sustainability, you're also not focused on the performance, and you're going to have a dip in both metrics, but we'll go into that a bit further. So just another stat out there is the UK is the 27th largest polluter of carbon emissions in the world. Again, that kind of just puts it in perspective. And then I've got a final stat here where if the internet were a country, it would be the 4th largest polluter in the world. So this is pretty much similar to the amount of emissions that Europe as a whole generates. So the internet is not just generating more emissions than like one country itself. It is generating more emissions than a collective of countries across the whole of Europe, which is crazy to think about. So that just puts in perspective how much of a problem it is, and hopefully it kind of like helps you understand why we should be making changes to reduce the emissions of our digital infrastructure, including websites and applications. So making websites more energy efficient not only helps the environment, but also makes them faster and easier to use. I did touch on this earlier, but this leads to better visitor experiences and business results. So the following guide will show you how to make your website both greener and perform better. So we've split this into subsections, kind of including the planning stages, design, development, hosting, just so it kind of breaks it into bite-sized pieces. So the bits that are relevant to you, you can kind of just pick and choose which bits you can focus on. And then let's say you're a more technical person, you can actually start working with the code of your website and whatnot. There is bits for you there. And then it ends with a series of resources that you can use and read in your own time, which go into a bit more granular detail of how you can make positive changes on your website. So the first step is planning. So point 1 is set clear goals. The average website has too many pages, menus and pop-ups that don't add value. So before creating or updating a website, you need to consider the following. What is the website's purpose? Who your audience is? What are your key goals? What is your product or services value proposition, and who your competition is? Because if you are just creating a website without these considerations, what will happen is that you will overload it with content, you'll overload it with images, and you'll overload it with kind of just useless bits of information which are wasting energy, because it's just things that have to be stored every time a web page is loaded. Let's say you have a lot of images in there, those images have to be loaded every single time. So there is a reason that we have to kind of start being very mindful of the amount of content that we're producing here. And that always starts with the goal setting, because when you can really nail down exactly why you need a website, who is it targeting, what is the content, you'll actually have less pages, you'll have more kind of targeted pages and content, which will actually help users navigate through your website better. So if it takes 10 clicks for a user to get to a particular page, each time that page is loaded, that is using energy and creating emissions. But if that user can get to a page in 3 clicks, that's 7 pages less worth of energy emissions used, and also there's more chance that they can convert. So there is a kind of a win-win scenario here, where if you focus on the sustainable approach and the performance approach, you'll have a clearer website, people will be able to resonate with it better, but also it's going to have a better impact on the planet. The second one is VIP content only. So check your website and remove anything that isn't useful. So extra pages, images, videos, animations, whatnot, because all these assets require energy to be loaded and produce emissions. So be really critical on the content that you're actually putting on the website, because if it is just there to and it feels cool and it's there just for a bit of a creative flair, but it's not adding value, in some cases you can actually remove it. And one way you can do this is just talk to your users, talk to the audience and ask them what they actually want to see. It's always good to just kind of observe a potential customer navigating your website, see where they slip up, see which bits of content they skip and which bits of content they kind of start reading the most. Because then you can just prioritize that key bit of content. You're not wasting storage and data centers, you're not wasting the kind of the space, but also you're allowing that user to get all the information or read all the information they need very efficiently, because there is none of this bloat all over it, which can make a website slower and harder to use, but also increases its digital emissions. Second one is make your navigation simple. So for example, if you've gone on a website and you have 20 items across the navigation, there is so much choice that the user tends to make no choice whatsoever and leave the website. So the best design or planning you can do here in the navigation is just keep it super simple. Make sure your kind of cornerstone content or your cornerstone pages that you want people to visit first on the website are in that navigation bar. Be very critical about what you want in there, And then if you have a lot of pages you want people to navigate to, make sure to use drop-down menus as well. Because a user, rather than having to go, for example, into a products page and then click into a particular type of product and then click into a subsection of that product and then into the product, they can just skip kind of 3 page loads and get straight to that product if you want. So for example, we have this Wilson Power Solutions one here, where if someone wanted to see about the Wilson E3, they wouldn't have to click products, and then they wouldn't have to scan down a page and go to distribution transformers and then scan more and then click into the kind of product itself within that page. They can just get there in one click just via one menu. So it makes the experience more efficient and allows users to get to the content they need to get to very quickly. But also it's reducing the wastage in terms of like the data used, because you're not having to load a series of pages over and over again, where a user is probably not actually reading those initial pages. But you're also providing the opportunity to go to those pages if you wanted them to. So for example, if they're first to visit the website, it's very likely you want them to read those subsections. But if they're a user that's visited quite often, you just want to get them straight to where they want to go as efficiently as possible, because it reduces the amount of emissions, but there is more chance that user will convert into a customer as well. So again, sustainability and the performance side come hand in hand. Next one is use good SEO and clear writing. Search engine optimization is huge on websites, and it actually does come into sustainable websites. So SEO helps people find the right pages faster. Clear to the point copywriting helps users get information they need without wasting time scrolling through irrelevant text, and it's all about quality over quantity. And the reason why SEO is so important is, for example, you have these things called meta titles and meta descriptions. These are what search engines use to kind of understand the context of a page. So for example, if you are searching for a watering can and you wanted one for your garden, you would Google that, and then you would get a series of pages that pop up in Google in its kind of search engine results, and you'll choose the one most relevant to you. If your meta information is very good and the SEO is incredibly good and it's written straight to the point and very clear, it helps Google understand what is the context of those pages. And it'll kind of index it correctly within Google. So when someone is doing that Google search, there is more chance that the page you want people to find will show up in the correct search terms. So it essentially skips out that user kind of like flicking through a series of random pages or random sites, because they can get to your page immediately just from Google because you've got incredibly good SEO. And it's also about making sure that it's written in very like human language. There is a common misconception that you want to try and get like keywords in as much as possible, and this is like a very old school SEO kind of technique. Nowadays it's better just to write for people, write how you would want someone to tell you something. So if you are providing a bit of information, just say exactly how it is. Like a spade is a spade, so call it a spade. Don't try and do all this kind of fluffy language, because it can confuse users. Users tend to just want very clear and simple copywriting and written text in terms like on-page SEO, to help them understand and know the context of the page and the content they're reading. Because if it is very clear, they'll know exactly what the page is about, and they'll know if that page is for them, improving their experience, and if it resonates with them, they're more likely to get in touch. But also, it prevents that wastage where they're kind of a bit puzzled about what you do or what the product is and like flicking through pages. So the whole aim here is that you want to reduce the amount of page visits across your website, because the more pages people go through, the lower that conversion rate will go, but also the more emissions are generated as people flick through them. So the next section is design. In terms of design, less is more is always better when it comes to low carbon websites. A clean, easy to navigate website reduces unnecessary clicks and loads way faster. So you don't want to clutter pages with just loads and loads of content. You actually want to use some white space, what people call blank space, so your website looks more organized and readable. When working with kind of like businesses and clients and stuff like that, a common request is that they want as much content as possible in the screen real estate. So that is kind of like from the top and bottom of your monitor, they want as much content as possible when you're scrolling. That is actually tends to be bad practice, because you'll create too much overwhelm for the user. users on websites tend to like very bite-sized, digestible content, so you actually want to keep your content restricted, and that includes kind of like any images, any text. So you want to space it out so there's, when people are scrolling through the website, they know exactly which bit of content they should be focusing at as they scroll through, and that would help them digest that content better and help them understand what the context of the page is. Also, when it comes to kind of the emissions as well, when you have less things on the page, there is less to load, which again reduces the amount of energy usage that's needed to load these kind of assets, including like videos, images, fonts and stuff like that. But also it improves the performance of the website as well. If you have less things to load, the website will load faster. So again, I'm going to kind of keep repeating this all the way through. You'll get a increase in performance but a reduction in the energy emissions. So again, it's a win-win on both sides. This is a big one. So use fewer images. A lot of websites we see tend to be overloaded with just loads and loads of like stock images, stock pictures, stock illustrations, which aren't actually providing any value. So just wanted to take into consideration, a picture can tell 1,000 words, but too many images and illustrations can slow the website down. So you only want to use images that add real value. And the important bit here is a picture can tell 1,000 words. So you want to make sure that the pictures and images and photography you're using is actually telling a story. If you've gone on and just found a random stock image just because it looks cool, there's a very good chance that you could just eliminate that from your website as it's not needed because it's not providing value. Scenarios where images can be incredibly good and provide value is if you are talking about kind of like a product, or let's say a software as a service product with an interface. It's great to have a visual demonstration of that product there just so people can understand the context of the text. But let's say you're talking about the product and you're talking about how it works, and then you just have a very like stock image of just some code on a screen or people in an office. It's not providing value. It's just distracting that user. And again, images do require a lot of energy to be loaded, so you want to reduce it down as much as possible. But so again, it comes hand in hand. You know, the amount of, if you reduce the amount of images on your website, you're going to get a faster loading website as well. And also, users are going to be able to navigate through that content a lot easier without any distractions of just like random images here and there. So make sure they are adding value and be really critical on that point. Next one is limit the fonts. So to get a bit technical here, using system fonts, so ones that are already installed on most devices, reduce the amount of data required to load your website. Because the reason behind this is that the website doesn't have to make a request to the data center to send that font file. They can just fetch that from the user's device, whether that be a mobile phone, whether that be a laptop, and load it that way, which is way more efficient. Although people have brands, people have brand guidelines, we're fully aware of that. So in cases where you need to use custom fonts, the best scenario is use only 1 or 2 styles. So what that means is, for example, use kind of like regular and bold if you're only using regular and bold, and make sure you keep it simple. What a lot of people tend to do is, let's say you are using, for example, Google fonts, they'll just load in every single font weight. So that includes like light, super light, italic, bold, semi-bold, medium, and it could be like 10 font weights, and every time someone visits your website, all 10 of those are being loaded in every single time, which is incredibly inefficient because you're just loading in a file or a series of files that you just don't even need. You're never even going to touch. So if you are only using, let's say, regular and bold, make sure you only load the regular and bold font, because again, you're reducing the amount of emissions generated, but it's going to be faster because there's less files to load. And another point on this is you want to make sure you self-host these fonts if you can. So that just means putting that font onto the server that your website is on, rather than relying on third-party services such as Google Fonts, because when you fetch from Google Fonts, it has to make a bigger request, and they've got a lot of tracking in there, and it sends a lot more data. Whereas if you just upload the font directly to your server, it's a shorter request for that website, and also it's going to load faster, and you can work on optimizing that as well. So that's always the best practice. Further on into this kind of presentation, I have a bit of a guide about the best font files you can use as well, but we'll go into that in a short while. Another one in terms of design is use dark mode. So dark mode reduces the energy consumption on OLED and AMOLED screens by displaying fewer bright pixels. So dark mode is not absolutely necessary, but in some cases it can provide a lot of value to users. And in terms of like the website emissions, the way it works is that on these kind of modern LED screens, if let's say you use a black background, rather than showing a black pixel, that pixel will just turn off completely. So if you have a fully black background, it has to be pure black, not like an off black or something like that, like a pure black. That can save a huge amount of emissions in terms of like the page load and the screen loading, sorry, not screen loading, the page loading. Because if those LEDs don't have to turn on, they're not using any energy at all. So that's just one big thing to consider. Although not everyone likes dark mode. Some people prefer to browse in a light mode. So for example, some users with, let's say, dyslexia really struggle on a dark mode screen. So the best scenario is to give users a choice. So allow them to kind of toggle between light mode and dark mode if they can. But in terms of the emissions, dark mode will always be better if that is like your number one priority. Another thing to consider on here as well is accessibility. Providing users the option between the light mode and dark mode allows them to make their own accessibility choices. So let's say someone gets migraines from a light mode website, which is white backgrounds, very like kind of light. They can switch it to a dark mode and reduce those migraines. And there's other like scenarios where dark mode might help someone navigate your website as well. So if you have the budget available or the technical expertise, best case is make sure it's applicable to dark mode and light mode. And another one on design is avoid videos if possible. Videos on websites can provide a lot of value when they are used very strategically. So for example, if you are trying to display a large amount of content and value in a very succinct way, a video will work very well. So let's say it is like a demo of a product you've built. Rather than kind of writing out a huge kind of like text written page with loads and loads of images to explain how it works, one video in that scenario could kind of accommodate all that content very efficiently. Although, because videos tend to be massive in terms of file size, they produce a huge amount of website emissions. So you've got to be very mindful about the choice of when you use videos on your website. Make sure they do provide a huge amount of value and there is no alternative other than use a video in that scenario. So for example, like a product demo or something like that, or a video-led infographic. Because if you fill your website with videos all over the place, each of those videos themselves is in some cases going to be bigger than the whole website itself, because if you have a high resolution video, they require a massive file size to render, as it's essentially like a series of images over and over again. So that's just one big thing to consider, but we're not saying completely remove them, because there are cases where videos do provide a huge amount of value, but you're just going to consider that they do have a massive impact on the environment if you are just using them everywhere on your website. Further down in this presentation as well, we've got a bit about like kind of how you can optimize videos for deliverability in the technical side. So the next section is development. There's going to be some elements here which are going to be quite technical. So if you have a technical background, some of this will make sense. If you don't have a technical background, there are some resources at the end of this presentation which can also be downloaded as a PDF, so you can click through and do your own research in your own time to find a bit more granular detail. But the first one in terms of development is write efficient code. So best coding practices help websites run faster and use less energy. So you want to minimize unused kind of code, including JavaScript, CSS, and any third-party libraries to reduce that page size, load time, and energy consumption. If you want to get super technical, you can use native browser technologies. I won't go into that in this presentation, although I've put a link in here, so when you do if you want to download the PDF, you can click into that and explain what a native browser technology is. But in terms of when you're writing code, when you write code, the more code you write, the bigger that file gets. When that file gets loaded by a user, for example, requesting your website, the bigger that file, the longer it can take, the more energy it requires, and the more energy consumption it requires to get that rendered. So the best coding practice, which some developers tend to not actually follow, is just make it super duper efficient. Make sure you don't have any redundant code. Make sure the code you're writing is efficient. Make sure it's actually needed. Don't have any random functions working behind the scenes that you don't actually need. Just make sure it's all very strategically done and it's actually having an impact on the website. Another one is use lazy loading. This is huge in terms of website emissions. So what lazy loading means, it means that images and videos only load when they're needed. So for example, there is this idea of a below the fold on websites, and this comes from newspapers where the fold is. You don't want anything below that fold, which is the bottom of your screen, to be loaded unnecessarily. Because let's say someone goes on your website, they just only stay at the top section and never scroll. There is no point of loading what's underneath. So by enabling lazy loading, you can tell assets below the fold, including videos and images, only start loading in if that user is scrolling towards that asset, and it will scroll in behind the scenes. So essentially that prevents any unnecessary loading way below your screen, and it actually makes the website really, really fast because you're not loading in loads and loads of images here and there that no one's ever going to see. And in that scenario where a user only hits the hero page, it'll only load in that one image that's in the hero section. But if you didn't have lazy loading enabled for all the things below the fold, it would take a long time to load because it'll have to try and load in every single image and video if you have them on your website. So this website optimization technique reduces the data transfer, decreases the server load, and improves performance, especially on mobile devices. So mobile devices is a big one here. Let's say someone doesn't have a Wi-Fi connection and they're in a rural area and only have a 3G connection. You need to be really mindful of the amount of data usage because they tend to have a slower connection, so you want it to still load fast for them. If you can reduce the amount of data usage and the amount of assets and stuff to load on a mobile network connection, you'll still get fast loading. Next one is use modern file formats. So using the right file formats makes the website load faster and uses less energy. So when it comes to images, there is formats called WebP and AVIF images, which retain the high quality while having a smaller file size. So these use a form of lossless compression, which means the quality stays the same, but the file size gets reduced, so there is no impact on that quality. So this reduces the data usage by sometimes 25 to 50% compared to using JPEGs and PNGs. Further into this slide presentation, I'll go into how you can actually use these modern file formats, because they're not something that you can just export here and there from a standard program. You have to use some particular technologies to convert those images to these file formats, but it is relatively simple once it's set up. In terms of fonts, WAF2 is a font format that is 50% smaller than the standard, which people tend to know fonts by, TTF. This makes fonts load quicker and improves the website speed, accessibility, and energy efficiency. So there's a lot of online converters you can use just to convert a font from, for example, TTF to WAF2, and it will just do the full compression for you. It doesn't have really any impact on the visuals of the font. It just makes them smaller and more efficient to load. These are going to be some of the biggest impacts in terms of the technical side of a website that you can have in terms of reducing the environmental emissions. You want to make sure that everything is compressed as far as it can be, so you're just not loading in unnecessary data when it's not needed. Next one is remove extra code. Just like regular housekeeping, you should keep your website tidy by routinely removing the necessary code and optimizing essential code to make your website faster, easier to maintain, and more energy efficient. So for example, in your house, you don't want loads and loads and loads of clutter, like getting all over the place, because it makes it very hard to find things. It can slow your day down because everything's jumbled up. And it's the same case in the website in terms of like the code. You want to do some housekeeping on the code, which is called refactoring, which is just like removing anything that's redundant, removing anything that's unnecessary, and just giving it a cleanup. Because when you do that, it will actually save you money and time in the long run by making your website more scalable. And this is because it doesn't take as long for developers to figure out what's going on. If a developer has to kind of start sifting through loads of random bits of code that makes no sense, but it's not actually doing anything, it's going to waste their time, it's going to waste your money as a business owner, for example. But if it is done very efficiently and as a regular cleanup, it will make it a lot easier for a developer to go into your website and understand what's going on. And also, when that web page loads, for example, there isn't just unnecessary code being loaded in. It's only loading in exactly what's needed to make that website function. So it's going to be faster, and hopefully because it's faster, you'll get a bigger return on investment as well. So the sustainable angle, the cost savings, the scalability, and the performance angle all goes hand in hand. So again, it's a no-brainer to start looking into these things. So the next one is hosting. Big one, probably the easiest win you can have, is use a green host. A green web host uses renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. So there's a great website called the Green Web Foundation. So they have a tool where you can just drop your web address in and it'll tell you whether you are using a web host that has renewable energy or fossil fuel energy. Moving your website to a new host is probably one of the easiest things you can do. So if your website does get flagged up that it's using fossil fuel energy, they have a full directory of all the verified Green Web Foundation companies, including ourselves, which can take over your website and make sure that it's running off 100% renewable energy at all times. In terms of the environmental impact, this will be huge, and it is the simplest one you can have. So if there's one thing you want to take away from this whole webinar, that would be it. Next one is use a content delivery network. So we were talking about kind of the modern file formats like videos and images and how to optimize them. So we mentioned kind of WebP, AVIF. Content delivery networks are brilliant ways to manage these. So for example, if you have a global audience but hosting in one location, that isn't always practical, because let's say you are based in the UK but you are wanting visitors from Asia. That is a huge distance for people to make a request, and if your data center is in the UK, there will be a slight delay. Although if you use a content delivery network, which is literally just a network of data servers which hold your content, you can then deliver the assets, so for example images, fonts, videos, the pages themselves, from the closest proximity location to them. So if some of that content you have is already stored on a server in Asia, and someone makes a page request, so visits your website from Asia, it will very quickly kind of get that content, and there's just a shorter physical distance. The shorter the physical distance, the less energy it actually uses, but also the faster it would load. And then the final point on content delivery networks is they also optimize your images and fonts and videos and whatnot to make them more sustainable. So let's say someone is visiting your website on a mobile device. You don't want to load an image which is huge, let's say 2,000 pixels wide, because that is bigger than a desktop monitor in some cases. You would only want to load an image which fits that screen size. And what a content delivery network will do, it will read the device's screen size, and then it will just deliver an image that fits that user's exact screen size. So it might rescale it down to like 600 pixels wide, and that will massively reduce the amount of data that image or video or what it may be is required to be loaded. So it will do all the optimization for you. It will also convert the files for you as well. So let's say you've uploaded lots of PNGs, lots of JPEGs to your website. It will convert all those to, for example, an AVIF file, a WebP file for you. And it'll also check if the user is making a request to your website, so visiting your website again, from a browser that doesn't support, for example, this newest format, which is AVIF, it will fall back to the next optimized format, which would be, for example, WebP. So you don't even have to think about, oh, would a user not be able to see the content? would there be a bit of kind of like hint, like some elements not showing up because their browser or device doesn't support those particular file formats? It handles it all for you, and you don't have to think about it. So again, content delivery networks are absolutely brilliant. One that we always recommend is called IMGIX. If let's say you've got a WordPress website or any sort of CMS, you can just get this installed, and what it'll do, it will kind of take all the content there, it will re-optimize it for you, and any like new assets you upload to your website, it will deliver them in the most optimized format. So again, massively increase the speed, but also reduce the amount of data usage as well as reduce the amount of emissions that are generated. Another big one is enable caching. So this is across the website and the servers. So caching saves copies of your web pages so you don't have to reload from scratch each time someone visits your website. This isn't just on the web pages, it's also on like the assets. This could be videos, it could be fonts, it could be images. It will save a filed storage of it, which is like a copy on that user's device or on that server, and then it will just kind of reference that, for example, in a filing cabinet that's already like indexed with like A, B, C, D. Makes it really efficient. So what it can do, it can compress those particular files, and then when someone makes a request, it can just fetch that compressed file, display it really fast, and it's going to be insanely quick. So on the data center side, or on your server side, sorry, you can do particular things. It's called kind of gzip compression or Brotli compression. So they're terms you could look into, or you could just mention those to your website developer. And they are very simple to turn on. You just drop some code in and your server will start just kind of caching and optimizing things for you. In terms of like the website side, there's another thing called static site generation, which is a very common technique as well. So static site generation is essentially, rather than a user visiting your website and having to make a request to the server to kind of process the kind of codes and the file behind it, it would already have generated a static version of it, which will generate HTML files. So HTML files is what websites generally kind of what websites will use to render a web page. So it will pre-generate anything for you. So rather than having to ask the server to process a file and do all kind of like server-side processing where there's a delay, it will just skip all that and it will just get this static file, display that straight away. And in some cases, it can actually make pages load up to 10 times faster. So again, it is a massive one that you should have on your website. If this is a bit too technical, it's probably worth sending these to your web development agency or freelancer or partner, just asking, are these things already applied to your website? Are they things you can do? Because they'll increase the performance, but it'll also reduce the amount of emissions per page load, because all these techniques are all about kind of reducing wastage and compressing things to be the smallest file size they can be. Another big one is keep servers and software updated. Software, especially kind of like website, content management systems, servers and whatnot, they're always getting more efficient. So there's development teams behind the scenes which are working on them to make them run faster, less wastage. So you should always be on board with making sure they're updated. There's a very common theme that people never even look at like what software their servers are running off, and maybe like 3, 4, 5 years outdated, where's a newer version available. So again, it's probably one asking your website development agency, freelancer partner, or the host that you're using, are we running on that latest version? If not, you can make that switch, and it's very likely it will use less energy but also increase the performance of your website. That's a very big one, because again, in terms of like the security side as well, in some cases certain like kind of server software will go outdated and be no longer supported from a security angle. If let's say a bit of software has been kind of discontinued 3 years ago, but you're still running on software 5 years ago, which is actually quite common, you have a major security vulnerability where your website could be hacked. So that is another big thing to consider. And then the final points in this presentation is the maintenance side of things. So remove unused content. 96.55% of internet content never gets visited on Google. So this, for example, like we are churning out so much content. So like blog posts, news articles, kind of news publishers are all very big on this, that no one ever actually kind of reads after a series of time. And 96.55% of that's indexed on Google, never even gets visited or clicked, although it does require energy to store those on data centers. So as a collective of people running businesses, individuals, we should be really looking into what content are we hosting. Can a lot of it just be eliminated because it's just wasting energy, not being used? So if content isn't useful or needed, delete it to keep your website lighter, faster and more sustainable. It'll also improve the user experience and search performance by eliminating unnecessary clutter. So again, for example, if you have a blog and it's got articles dating all the way back like 8 years, do you even need to keep any of the content past 3 years, let's say? Maybe it's like you were essentially at a different company at that point. You might have been focusing on a different product or a different service. You might have pivoted. So you can actually just eliminate all that content. You don't want people visiting it anyway, so why are you still storing it? So just do a bit of a content audit, delete everything that you can that's not providing value to the user, and that will reduce the amount of wasted energy and just general waste on your website. Another one is monitor performance. Performance again and sustainable websites go hand in hand. So there's tools like page speed and insights or GT metrics that you can use to find areas where your website could be improved, and also reveal opportunities to reduce energy consumption. For more granular insights, there's tools such as Screaming Frog, which is a paid tool, which can identify problematic pages and assets, providing you with granular insights. So let's say you run, page speed insight, and it says there's 5 images which are really slowing down your website. You already know that if you compress those, it'll speed up your website, but also reduce the amount of emissions because it's reducing the amount of data wastage. So for another quick win, you could just use PageSpeed Insights, which is another clickable link if you download the PDF, run your website through there, and it will just kind of show you a series of things that you can do to make changes on your website to make it just perform better. And these are things you should be doing very regularly. The goalpost in terms of like how Google scans websites, how it understands if a website is good or not, is always changing. Algorithms are changing. So you should be doing this every kind of like 3 months just to double check that your website is still in line with best standard and best practice. If it's not, you'll have to just do some minor tweaks, changes there, and just get it up to scratch again. But it should be done regularly. But a lot of people don't even consider these until it's like 3 years down the line. They say their website's not performing, it's slow, and the reason why is because there hasn't been regular maintenance to keep it fast. So that is everything in terms of like the tips and tricks. Towards at the end of it there, it gets quite technical. So we do have a series of resources that you can use, which will go into a bit more granular detail into some of these topics. So the website sustainability guidelines is a brilliant one. So it's a guide on designing, developing and delivering websites with sustainability in mind. We mentioned the Green Web Foundation, so you can kind of run an audit on your website to find out if it is running on renewable energy or fossil fuels. The Sustainable Developer Directory, again, is brilliant. So if you're looking for a developer that has this sustainable approach, they have a full directory which you can search by region, country, whatnot. We're also one of the developers in there. Sustainable Web Design is community-led, and it has a lot of kind of research papers, research articles, and community submissions of how to make websites greener. Green Software Foundation is brilliant if you're looking for the more kind of in-depth software side. So this is backed by the Linux Foundation. It's got a huge amount of resources in terms of like coding practices. So a lot of philosophies and theories where if you wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of the code. And then if you're looking to understand the sustainability of your current website, there we have a custom-built sustainability audit where you can run your website through it. We'll send you a report and it will give you a full breakdown on the current digital emissions of your website, where the problems are and what things you can do to make it more efficient. Hopefully that has provided some value and insights into how you can make your website more efficient, reduce its digital emissions, but as well as improving its performance so you get a bigger return on investment from it. If you do have any questions, you can drop me an email at matt@madeby.studio, or if you connect with me on LinkedIn as well, I do post resources or insights on kind of low carbon and sustainable websites as well, so you can reach out to me there at any time. Thank you.